His missing string wasn't missing anymore. A stranger had kept them safe. The fiddle was in 4 pieces when I found it. Not smashed, nothing dramatic like that. Just 4 pieces, the way old things come apart when the glue finally decides it's done holding, when the cold gets deep enough, and the wood has been through enough winters, and the maker who built it is 71 years old and let it fall off the back of a wagon because his hands don't close the way they used to and he didn't tie the case down right. The case had popped open on impact. The neck lay about 6 feet from the body. The tailpiece was somewhere in the scrub. The bow was mostly fine, which struck me as the cruelest part. The bow lying there in the yellow grass, not a hair broken. I sat down next to it right there on the road. Didn't plan to. My knees just went. It was dusk and the wagon was gone, Elias Pryor's wagon, which had been my ride as far as Tucson, and Elias had not yet noticed I was no longer in it. The road here was nothing. A scratch in the red dirt between 2 stands of juniper. No town I knew of for 15 miles in either direction. My traveling pack had gone with the wagon. I had the clothes I was wearing, a pocket knife, about 40 cents, and now a broken fiddle on the ground in front of me. I sat there long enough for the light to go orange. People ask me sometimes, people who know what that fiddle was, what it represented, they ask what I thought about sitting there. I tell them the truth, nothing. My mind went entirely quiet. That hasn't happened many times in my life, and never before in a good way. This wasn't a good way either. It was the quiet of a man who has run out of argument. I had been playing fiddles for 53 years. I had made them for 40. My father taught me to play in a barn in Tennessee when I was 8 and my hands were too small to really grip the neck right, and he just laughed and said your hands'll catch up to the music. They did. I played through a war, not fighting in it. I was too young, but playing at the edges of it, at camps and hospital tents, which is its own kind of damage. I played at weddings, and I played at funerals, and I played at dances where the girls were young and the night went long, and I played alone in my shop in the dark after Margaret died, not because it helped, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Margaret had been gone 11 years. I had kept the shop running another 8 and then sold it when my left ring finger stopped cooperating. Nerve damage, the doctor said. Not going to get better. I could still play some. But I couldn't make the fiddles the way I used to, couldn't do the fine work. So I sold the shop and I sold the house and I packed what fit in a bag and I started moving, which is a thing some men do when they run out of reasons to stay still. The fiddle on the ground had been made by my own hands. Spruce top, maple back and sides, neck from a piece of curly maple I'd been holding for 12 years waiting for the right instrument. I had built it the last winter before Margaret got sick, and I had played it at her funeral, which she would have wanted. It was not the most perfect thing I ever made, but it was the most mine. And now it was in the dirt in 4 pieces, and the light was going, and I was sitting on the ground like an old fool. I picked up the pieces, all 4. The tailpiece took me a while to find in the scrub, but I found it. I put them carefully in the open case, closed the latches by feel in the near dark, and I stood up and I walked. No particular direction. The road ran north and south, and I went north because north was slightly downhill and my knees preferred it. I walked for maybe an hour before I saw the light. It was a lamp in a window set back from the road. A small house, adobe walls, flat roof, a lean-to on one side with a horse in it, a garden plot with a low fence around it. I could smell wood smoke and something cooking, beans maybe, and I stood at the edge of the road for a moment and considered what I was. An old man with a broken instrument case, no money worth mentioning, arriving at a stranger's door in the dark. I knocked anyway. The woman who opened the door was probably 45, maybe 50, hard to tell in lamplight. Dark hair going to gray, pulled back. She was wearing a canvas work apron over a plain dress, and she had a wooden spoon in her hand. And she looked at me with the specific expression of a person who is not particularly startled, but is also not going to make any assumptions. "I'm not dangerous," I said, which is probably not the most reassuring thing a stranger has ever opened with. She looked at the case in my hand. Is that a fiddle? What's left of one? She stepped back from the door. Come in then. Her name was Nora Voss. She had homesteaded this land 8 years ago with her husband, and her husband had died of a fever 4 years back, and she had stayed because she had put too much into the ground to walk away from it. She said all of this while she ladled beans into a bowl and set it in front of me without being asked. The way people do when feeding someone is simply the right next move, and there is no drama required around it. I told her about the wagon. She nodded. Elias Pryor, she said. I know him. He'll turn around when he notices. He may not notice until Tucson. Then he'll turn around from Tucson. She sat down across the table with her own bowl. Where were you headed? Tucson, then wherever. Wherever, she repeated, not mocking it, just noting it. I'm between destinations, I said. She looked at me not unkindly, but directly, the way some women look at a thing they're trying to understand the dimensions of. You're a fiddler. Was a fiddlemaker, am a fiddler. Depends on the day. What happened to the fiddle? I told her that too. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than people think. When I was done, she said, can it be fixed? With the right tools in the right shop, yes. The neck joint is the main problem, the top seam. Doable. Do you have the tools? They're in my pack, which is in the wagon. She was quiet a moment. Then, there's a man in Millbrook that's 9 miles east who does carpentry. Fine work. He might have what you need. I nodded and ate my beans. They were good beans, cooked with a piece of salt pork and some dried pepper. I was hungrier than I'd let myself notice. You can sleep in the lean-to, she said. There's a cot there I use when I'm working late with the horse. It's warm enough. I thanked her. She waved it off. I didn't sleep much. The horse, a gray mare named Biscuit, which seemed too gentle a name for a horse that large, didn't mind my presence, which I appreciated. I lay on the cot and looked at the case in the dark and thought about the fiddle inside it, and about what it meant that it was broken, which was probably more than I wanted it to mean. In the morning, Nora Voss was already up. She had coffee made and eggs on the iron skillet, and she acted as though having an old stranger in her lean-to was unremarkable. I suspected she was the kind of person who made everything unremarkable as a general policy, which is a gift most people don't recognize as a gift. I'll take you to Millbrook, she said. You don't have to do that. I need to go anyway, hardware. She looked at the coffee in her hand. I go Thursdays, this is Thursday. It might have been Thursday. I had lost track. We went in her wagon, which was smaller than Elias Pryor's and considerably better maintained. She drove herself without comment, handling the horse with the easy competence of someone who has done a thing so many times that doing it well requires no particular thought. The road east was rough in places, and she navigated it without complaint. The carpenter in Millbrook was a man named Gustavo who had come up from Sonora 20 years ago and had the best set of clamps I had seen outside of a professional shop. He looked at the fiddle for a long time without speaking. Then he said in careful English, "Spruce and maple." "Yes, good spruce. Adirondack, I've had it 40 years. He nodded slowly, the way men do when they are recognizing the weight of a thing. He let me use his bench and his clamps and his hide glue, which he made himself and which was better than what I used to make, and I spent the better part of 4 hours working on that fiddle while Gustavo did his own work at the other end of the shop, and Nora went about her business in town. The neck joint needed to be completely reglued. The top seam I could close cleanly. It had separated evenly and the wood hadn't distorted. There was a crack along the bass side of the top, near the lower bout, that I could stabilize but not make invisible. It would be there. A scar. The instrument would know it had fallen. I was working on that crack when Nora came back. She stood in the doorway of the shop and watched without speaking for a while. "Will it play?" she asked eventually. "Yes." "Will it play the same?" I thought about that. Different, not worse maybe, just different. She nodded like that was a satisfactory answer, and went to look at something Gustavo had on his wall, a carved wooden panel with a repeating geometric pattern, and she asked him about it in Spanish, which she apparently spoke well, and I listened to them talk while I worked the crack. We drove back in the late afternoon. The light was long and low, and the desert had gone that particular shade of amber that makes a man feel something he can't put a name to. I had the fiddle in the case in my lap, glue still curring, and I kept my hand on the case the way you keep your hand on something you're not ready to test yet. "Thank you," I said, "for Millbrook for last night." "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing." She drove a while without answering, the mare's hooves on the packed dirt, a hawk somewhere to the north. "You said you were a fiddle maker," she said. "What does that mean exactly, day to day?" So I told her. I told her about the shop, about choosing wood the way you tap a piece of spruce and listen for the ring, how you learn to hear it, years of learning. About graduation of the top plate, the arching, the way every piece of maple has its own grain, and you have to read what the wood wants to do before you can ask it to do something else. I told her about the fiddles I made that never quite sang the way I heard them in my head, and the ones, maybe 6 or 7 in 40 years, that came out better than I knew how to make them, that made me feel like I'd been used as an instrument myself, like the fiddle had been in the wood all along, and I just had the sense to find it. She listened to all of this. When I stopped, she said, "That's not a small thing to give up." I hadn't said I'd given it up. She'd understood it anyway. "The finger," I said. "I know." She glanced at my left hand on the case. "I had a garden back in Ohio before we came out here that I had to leave behind. 12 years of that garden. Roses mostly, but other things too. A pergola I'd built myself." She was quiet a moment. "You leave things and you keep going, but it's not nothing that you left." I looked at the road. The junipers were coming up on the left, the ones I'd walked through the night before. "My wife would have liked you," I said. "She had that same quality, saying the true thing plainly." "What was her name?" "Margaret." "How long ago?" 11 years. She nodded and said nothing else, and that nothing felt right. Not sorry for your loss. Not a platitude. Just acknowledgement, which is sometimes the only honest response. Elias Pryor's wagon was in front of Nora's house when we got back. Elias himself was sitting on her porch steps looking sheepish, which was his natural state when he'd done something thoughtless, and he'd apparently retrieved my pack from the wagon bed and set it by the door. He started explaining before we'd even stopped. He hadn't noticed until almost dark, had camped and come back at first light, terrible sorry. The ruts on that road were worse than he remembered. I told him it was fine, it mostly was. He had some business to attend to in the direction of Millbrook, he said, and he'd be back through the next morning if I wanted to continue on to Tucson. I said I'd think about it. Elias left. Nora went inside to start supper, and I sat on the porch steps where Elias had been, and I opened the pack and went through what was there. My tools, some clothes, a few letters I'd been carrying around that I should have gotten rid of years ago, a photograph of Margaret in a tin frame, the photograph going soft at the edges from being handled. I looked at the photograph for a while, then I put it back. I should say something here about what I was feeling, sitting on that step. I'm not sure I can say it right. It wasn't happiness exactly, not yet. It was more like the return of something I hadn't noticed leaving, some basic willingness to be where I was, to be in this particular evening rather than somewhere behind it. The fiddle was inside, glue curring on the workbench Nora had cleared space on without being asked. My pack was beside me. The light was going gold over the desert to the west. That's the best I can do. Supper was leftover beans and cornbread she made fresh, and a cup of something hot that was not quite coffee, some combination of roasted grain and something else I never identified, but that tasted right. We ate mostly without talking, not an uncomfortable silence, the other kind. After she washed the dishes and I dried them, which felt natural in a way that surprised me. In my shop I had always cleaned up alone. "Where were you headed?" she asked again. "In Tucson. There's a man there I used to know. He deals in instruments. I thought maybe there was work." "What kind of work?" "Repair, maybe, if my hands hold." She was quiet, drying her hands on the cloth. "There's a school in Millbrook," she said. "A church school, but they take everyone. They've been trying to find someone to teach music. I heard it at the hardware this morning." I looked at her. "I'm not suggesting," she said. "I'm just saying what I heard." But she was looking at me in a way that was not exactly nothing, and I understood that she was, in fact, suggesting, and that the suggestion was not about a job. "I've never taught," I said. "You explained to me how to hear wood," she said. "You explained it so well I think I could almost do it." I didn't say anything to that. "I'm not asking you to stay," she said. "I'm just pointing out that Millbrook is 9 miles, and that the man who deals in instruments in Tucson is 140, and that Elias Pryor comes through here every 2 weeks. She went to the window and looked out at the dark. The lamp on the table threw her shadow long against the wall. "And there's a workbench in the barn," she said. "If a man needed a place to do fine work, the light in there is good in the mornings." I sat with that. "I'm a stranger," I said. "Arrived at your door with a broken fiddle and 40 cents. I know what you arrived with." "Why would you?" "Because I've been on this land 4 years by myself," she said. "And you talked about making fiddles for an hour and didn't say a single unnecessary word. And when you touched that instrument at Gustavo's bench your hands knew what they were doing." She turned from the window. "I'm not sentimental about it. I have work here that needs doing and the winters are long and I'm tired of my own company, and you clearly have nowhere in particular you're going." She wasn't wrong. "The fiddle needs 2 more days to cure properly," I said. "I know. I could play something on the 3rd day, if it plays the way I think it will." "I'd like that," she said. I stayed 2 days and then a 3rd. On the 3rd morning I took the fiddle off the workbench and I tuned it slowly, which took a while because the neck had shifted slightly and needed coaxing. I tightened the bow and rosined it. I stood in the barn in the morning light, which was exactly what she'd said it was, clear and gold, and coming in at the right angle. I put the fiddle under my chin. The crack was there in the tone. You could hear where the wood had been hurt, a slight roughness in the lower register, not quite a buzz, more like a shadow. But the instrument sang. It sang differently than it had before the fall, like I'd said to Nora it would. Something had opened up in the treble, a brightness that hadn't been there, as if the trauma had loosened something that had been too tight. Broken things sound different after you mend them. I have always known this. Knowing it and hearing it are different things. I played for about 20 minutes. Old tunes I'd known since childhood, things my father taught me in that barn in Tennessee. A reel, a slow air, a waltz I used to play for Margaret on her birthday that I hadn't played since she died because I couldn't bear to, and now played and found I could bear it after all. Nora was in the garden when I came out. She straightened up and looked at me. "It played," she said. "It played." She looked at the fiddle in my hand, then at me. There was something in her face I recognized, not pity, not softness. Something more like relief, or the look of a person who has been quietly holding something in trust and can now return it to its owner. "Gustavo's clamps held," she said. "They did." She went back to her weeding. I stood at the fence and watched her work for a minute, her hands in the dirt, pulling the small weeds from around the bean plants, the same unhurried competence she brought to everything. "The school in Millbrook," I said. "Do you know who I talked to?" She didn't look up, but her hand slowed for just a moment. "Preacher named Holt. He lives behind the church. Mornings are best. Elias comes through tomorrow." Day after, I could go with him to Millbrook and talk to Holt. Come back through here on his return trip. She was quiet for a moment, still not looking up. That would be the sensible route, she said, coming back through. I leaned on the fence. The desert stretched out to the south, red and juniper gray, mountains far off in the haze. The mare and the Linta shifted and blew. My name is Edmund, I said. Edmund Cal, I don't think I told you that. She looked up at me then in the morning light, and something changed in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but an arrival, like she had been looking at a door and it had finally opened. I know, she said. Elias told me. Then you've known this whole time? Yes. I looked at her, she looked at me. The beans needed weeding, and the fiddle needed playing, and somewhere in Millbrook there was a church school that needed a music teacher. And I was 71 years old with a nerve-damaged finger and a mended fiddle, and a workbench offered to me in a barn with good morning light. She put out her hand, not for shaking, nothing formal. She just put it out open, and I took it, and we stood like that for a moment at the garden fence, her hand in mine, both of us looking at the land. The workbench in the barn, I said. It's there when you need it, she said. I nodded. She went back to her weeding. I went back to the barn. I set the fiddle on the bench and looked at it for a long time. At the repaired seam, the stabilized crack along the bass bout, the place where the neck had been reglued and was holding now, would keep holding. The places where it had been broken were not invisible. You could see them if you knew where to look. I found I didn't mind that you could see them. Outside, the desert light moved on the walls. The horse shifted in her stall. I could hear Nora in the garden, the quiet sounds of work being done by someone who knows how to do it. I picked up the bow.